There's a ritual sacrifice happening in Maya Angelou's kitchen. Let's go find out what she's sacrificing.
She names the sky her own.
Good morning. Welcome to Lost for Words. I'm Sarah Woods. We're still exploring great women poets. Today it's Miss Maya Angelou. Today we'll be joining Miss Maya Angelou in her kitchen where some very violent things are happening. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and jump straight in and go discover what this is that's happening in her kitchen. This poem is called This Winter Day. It's on page 114 of her complete poetry. Okay, let me get comfortable. The kitchen is its readiness. White, green, and orange things leak their blood selves in the soup. Ritual sacrifice that snaps an odor at my nose and starts my tongue to march, slipping in the liquid of its drip. The day, silver striped in rain, is balked against my window and the soup. I love this poem. I feel like it has that sort of feeling of just like that warm, cozy kitchen on a cold, rainy day, which I feel like is already pretty satisfying in and of itself. But then it adds this sort of weird element to the poem of this sort of violence of ritual sacrifice thrown into this cooking experience, which makes it just a little more interesting than a regular cold day making soup in your kitchen. So the reason I actually picked this poem was because I love that that warm feeling mixed with that weird contrast of the like violent ritual sacrifice. But it also, when I read it, it sort of reminded me of a poem I covered a while back when I was exploring Sylvia Plath. She has this poem, I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it was maybe called Onion. And it's this whole poem about her experience of cutting her thumb instead of the onion, which then proceeds to be this violent poem of this, basically like this war, all this war imagery that starts to pour out of her thumb after she accidentally cuts her thumb instead of the onion. So I think having that poem already in the back of my mind, joining Maya Angelou in her kitchen and her cutting up vegetables for her soup, and including this violent ritual sacrifice, sort of makes me laugh a little bit. These poets, you know, I'm just imagining them in the kitchen with their knives and they are doing something mundane and just every day, like cutting vegetables to go in what they're cooking, and off their minds go to visualizing poetry and imagining a poem into the situation, which I think is a dangerous thing to do while you're holding a knife. But let's just go ahead and jump into Maya's poem. The first stanza, she brings us into her kitchen. She says, the kitchen is its readiness. So the kitchen, you know, here we are in her kitchen. It's ready. And white, green, and orange things. What are these white, green, and orange things? So we're in her kitchen and she's tossing colors to us for us to catch. And she's not telling us exactly what these things are, but we know we're in her kitchen and she's tossing us these colors. And so your brain starts to scramble to try to imagine what these white, green, and orange things are. You start imagining all the possibilities of things that could be in a kitchen that are those colors. And then it says, these white, green, and orange things leak their blood selves in the soup. So as soon as she says that, we know we are not just randomly in her kitchen. We are now in a pot of soup, and these white, green, and orange things are floating in the soup, and they're leaking their blood selves into the soup. And so after you get to the third line, it triggers this visual image of like vegetable soup or some kind of soup with vegetables in it. And for me, I guess I've cut up a lot of onions, celery, and carrots because I immediately know what these vegetables are. And I'm like, oh, she's making like some kind of vegetable soup, or soup that, you know, lots of soups I feel like have those three things in them. The onion for flavoring, the celery adds like saltiness, and the orange is just beautiful in soups. But here these little vegetables are, these little pieces of color, and they're leaking their blood into the soup. So we go from this kitchen to this soup, and there's something sort of kind of gross and violent happening with these vegetables. So these are not just vegetables relaxing in the soup. They're not just marinating in the soup. They're not just simmering in the soup. They are leaking their blood selves into the soup. So like they're very, like this onion, this carrot, this celery is like leaking its very essence into the soup. Okay, so now we're going to move to stanza 2. It says, ritual sacrifice that snaps an odor at my nose and starts my tongue to march, slipping in the liquid of its drip. So she starts to compare cooking and making this soup to a ritual sacrifice. And usually, I know when I think of a sacrifice, and she's already given these vegetables blood, like they have blood, like a living thing, like an animal or a human. So this ritual sacrifice for me makes it sparks images of like people groups throughout history or religions throughout history who have sacrificed human beings or animals, trying to appease, you know, whatever God they worship, or they're trying to appease Mother Nature because they need rain, or, you know, or they're trying to keep off a flood or an earthquake or a volcanic eruption, like, you know, whatever reason these cultures would make these sacrifices, trying to stay in good graces with Mother Nature or the God that they worship. Here, Maya Angelou has us in this poem cutting up onions, celery, and orange things like this food is a sacrifice, a ritual sacrifice, and it's their blood is leaking into the soup. And it's kind of like, well, who are we sacrificing these vegetables for, these white, orange, and green things for? And it says, it's a ritual sacrifice that snaps an odor at my nose. And it almost makes me imagine Maya Angelou as like, she's the thing trying to be appeased, like, or yeah, like she's the god or goddess or Mother Nature, the one trying to be appeased, because it says a ritual sacrifice that snaps an odor at my nose and starts my tongue to march. So you imagine her smelling this soup, this sacrifice of vegetables, and it starts her tongue, like that movement in her mouth of like wanting to taste. And it says it an odor at my nose and starts my tongue to march, slipping in the liquid of its drip. So you can imagine her tongue, like her mouth starting to water and like almost drool over this food that's being prepared or sacrificed in front of her. Her mouth is already tasting it because of the smell. These little white, green, and orange things that are leaking their very self into the soup have their odor, their like kind of like incense, you know what I mean, has reached her nose and has made her mouth start to water, and her tongue is slipping around, ready to taste it. And then it says that this is stanza 3. It says, "The day silver striped in rain is balked against my window and the soup." So here we have this like, you know, colorful, aromatic, warm, like cooking experience in her kitchen that has turned into a ritual sacrifice of these vegetables like bleeding into her soup. And her mouth is getting ready for them. So you can just imagine this like experience, this like almost kind of creepy thing that's happening in this kitchen. Creepy, violent, and beautiful all at the same time. And on the outside of her house, there is this silver striped rain. It's and she called this poem "This Winter Day," so it already gives you a feeling of coldness. So outside of her kitchen, outside of her house, outside of her window, there is a coldness, a grayness, and it is balked against her window and the soup. And so you could almost feel it's like this coldness, this grayness is like hesitating outside her window. Is it baffled? Is it, yeah, like what is this? When I think of the word balked, I don't feel like that's a word I use a lot. But I almost think of something that's like I balk. Like a hesitation, or like, oh, like what is going on in there? Like, like sort of curious amazement. I don't know if I'm using that word right. But yeah, this cold, rainy day that's silver and gray that's outside of the window. You can almost imagine it like looking into the window, like what's going on in there? And Maya Angelou's about to like engage in like eating this sacrifice that she has made for herself. I don't know. I just really like this poem. And I especially liked reading this poem this week at my house. It's gonna be raining for like 5 days, and kind of cool outside. So to me, this was a fun one to read this week. And it was also fun to read after exploring the last poem that I did of hers about, what was it called? Oh, The Mothering Blackness, where in that poem, how she goes from, it's like this returning home, and she goes from being cold to warm. So this one to me has that same like feeling of like this division of warmth and coldness, and then like all this like interesting imagery that's happening inside of her house while the cold is on the outside. I don't know, but I like it. Makes me want to make a little soup this week. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that short, fascinating, and a little bit violent poem of Maya Angelou's. Who knew cooking could be so entertaining? But I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you again next time.